Welcome to K-Zone. Today, we will share about what's the legacy of the Soviet Union's collapse on global politics. Let's start. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 was a pivotal event in modern history that marked the end of the Cold War and reshaped the geopolitical landscape. This complex and multifaceted process can be attributed to a combination of internal and external factors, each contributing to the ultimate demise of the Soviet superpower. The Soviet Union, officially known as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, was established in 1922 following the Russian Revolution of 1917. Under the leadership of the Bolshevik Party and figures like Vladimir Lenin and Joseph Stalin, it rapidly expanded its territory, becoming a global superpower by the mid-20th century. The Soviet Union was characterized by a one-party communist system, a planned economy, and a centralized government structure. Economic mismanagement. One of the central reasons for the Soviet Union's collapse was the systemic economic mismanagement that plagued the country throughout its existence. The command economy, where the government controlled all aspects of production and distribution, proved inefficient and led to chronic shortages of consumer goods and inefficiencies in resource allocation. The Soviet economy was burdened by chronic deficits, especially in agriculture. Despite being a vast country with abundant natural resources, the Soviet Union had to import grain due to inefficiencies in its collective farming system. This reliance on imports strained the already weakened economy. A significant portion of the Soviet Union's budget was dedicated to maintaining a massive military and competing with the United States in the arms race. This substantial military expenditure diverted resources away from civilian needs, exacerbating economic problems. Political factors. The Soviet regime was characterized by political repression, censorship, and human rights abuses. This led to a lack of political freedom and widespread dissatisfaction among the population. Dissidents and opposition movements, despite facing severe consequences, continued to challenge the regime. Corruption was rampant within the Soviet bureaucracy. The nomenklatura system, which allowed party elites to enjoy privileges and access to scarce goods, fueled resentment among the general population. The inefficiency of the bureaucratic apparatus hindered effective governance. Social factors. The Soviet Union was a multi-ethnic state, and nationalist sentiments were growing among its various ethnic groups. Nationalist movements in the Baltic states, Ukraine, and other regions sought greater autonomy and even independence from Moscow. Despite having a strong military and being a spacefaring nation, the quality of life for the average Soviet citizen was lower compared to Western countries. Shortages, long lines, and poor living conditions contributed to widespread dissatisfaction. External factors. The Cold War rivalry with the United States placed a heavy burden on the Soviet economy. Trying to keep pace with the U.S. in terms of military and technological advancements drained the Soviet Union's resources and contributed to its economic woes. The policies of U.S. President Ronald Reagan played a role in the Soviet Union's collapse. Reagan's military buildup, which included the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, put additional pressure on the Soviet economy, forcing them to allocate even more resources to defense. In the late 1980s, a wave of anti-communist movements swept through Eastern European countries, many of which were under Soviet influence. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe undermined the Soviet Union's sphere of influence and contributed to its weakening position. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev implemented a series of reforms, including glasnost, openness, and perestroika, economic restructuring, in an attempt to revitalize the Soviet system. However, these reforms inadvertently accelerated the unraveling of the Soviet Union by allowing greater political freedoms and revealing the extent of economic problems. The role of Gorbachev. Mikhail Gorbachev, who came to power in 1985, is often seen as a central figure in the Soviet Union's collapse. His attempts at reform were intended to modernize the Soviet system, but they also created a political opening that ultimately led to the unraveling of the USSR. Gorbachev's willingness to engage in dialogue with Western leaders, including U.S. Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, reduced tensions in the Cold War but also signaled a departure from the traditional Soviet policy of confrontation. The unraveling. By the late 1980s, the combination of economic hardship, political openness, and nationalist movements had weakened the Soviet Union's grip on its satellite states. In 1991, a coup attempt by hardline communists against Gorbachev's government further eroded the center's authority. Boris Yeltsin, the president of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, RSFSR, played a pivotal role in resisting the coup and consolidating power in Russia. As the Soviet republics began declaring their independence, the Soviet Union dissolved rapidly. On December 25, 1991, Gorbachev resigned, and the USSR officially ceased to exist. The Russian Federation, under the leadership of Boris Yeltsin, emerged as the successor state. The collapse of the Soviet Union was the result of a complex interplay of economic, political, social, and external factors. It marked the end of a decades-long superpower rivalry and the beginning of a new era in international relations. Mikhail Gorbachev's attempts at reform, combined with internal discontent and external pressures, created a perfect storm that led to the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the emergence of a new geopolitical order in the world. Thanks for watching. Don't forget like, share and subscribe.